Today is the day Humankind has received the long-awaited Fabius Maximus, was previously the October, now the November patch update. I've already covered it a little bit extensively on a live stream and in a previous video, so today I thought I'd just give you the juicy details. Here are my top 5 most significant updates of today's Humankind Fabius Maximus patch update. My name's JumboPixel. Be sure to obliterate the like button humankindly, and let's jump straight in. First and foremost, we should really talk about the most juicy change of all, putting the Día de Muertos celebrations to one side. It's culture and affinity balances. First up, we have changes to the expansionist and aesthetic cultures. The expansionists received the most love. Their era stars are now considerably easier to earn. You need to attach far fewer territories to cities to earn those stars. A big win for expansionist cultures across the board. Aesthetic cultures also received a little bit of love to their ability as well. They're now slightly stronger. However, it wasn't just overall affinities that got buffed, it was also individual cultures who received some buffs and nerfs. Buildings belonging to the French and the Turks, and actually a few others who had basically abilities that scaled with population or with adjacencies, have been toned down. For example, the Harappans now receive a +2 food instead of a +3 to their adjacency. The French no longer receive bonus science to their district unless you have collective minds active, and the Turks have been toned down from a 300% adjacency bonus to a 5% adjacency bonus. Overall, cultures have been significantly nerfed, those players, but others have been buffed. For example, the Phoenicians and the Romans can now research their key technologies 25% faster. So there's good changes, good balance tweaks across a variety of cultures, and I'll have the full patch notes for you to read in the description if you'd like to delve into more detail, but we have more things to discuss. Next up, I'd like to draw on something that isn't actually touched on a lot in the patch notes, aside from a couple of small sentences, but really makes a big difference to any culture and any game that you're playing. And no, it's not the tweaks to difficulty, which did happen. The AI is now slightly more competent. It's not also the myriad of bug fixes, which should have fixed a lot of those end-turn issues with nuclear weapons, and a whole load of stability things. Actually, it's stability itself, the in-game mechanic. Now, before you click away because it's boring, bear with me because it really matters. Stability has changed a lot, and now we are penalized more for spamming out a whole load of like-for-like districts next to each other. For example, a cluster of market quarters will really make you suffer in terms of stability, as you can see on screen now. Basically, the way it works now is there is a default -5 stability applied to any building district, and then for each additional like-for-like, i.e. the same district next to it, you receive a further stability penalty of -10, and it just continues to ramp up from there. The strategy now appears to be to utilize commons quarters a lot more. They break those negative adjacency bonuses and provide stability, a +5, to adjacent districts. It seems to be that we build them and we build around those, or build in more snaking patterns rather than clusters. Either way, these stability changes will significantly impact the stability and therefore influence generation of your empire, but also your district placement and city building. The changes are so wide-reaching and slightly complex that I'm actually going to cover them in a separate detail with a whole load more information. So if you'd like to hear more about them, don't forget to absolutely destroy the subscribe button. No, not the like button. And you'll see that video when it releases. Now I'd like to bring us back to the very beginning of the game and talk about some really wonderful quality of life changes that have come out in this update or are coming in a slightly smaller update that's going to come out next week. Basically, we can adjust our resource abundancy for strategic and luxury resources from the very beginning of the game. You can turn it right up to abundant or turn it right down to very scarce. And that really impacts not only the challenges that we can set for ourselves, but also how the entire game and trade, stability and economics, how all of that plays out. We have some additional changes though at the start of the game too. We'll be able to tweak certain and even more victory or game-ending conditions, allowing for a true endless experience, for example. And coming in just a couple of days, we'll be able to also change the colors of each empire to choose from tens of millions of options instead of the default ones that are in game. Speaking of empires, you can also now officially randomize your opponents, so you don't need to pick and choose who you want to fight. The fourth most significant change in this update is wide-reaching, sweeping changes to the civics tree. The civics tree now, and in particular some of those mid-game civics, have been changed a lot. I'm going to throw up some different ones on screen that I like so you can see some of them play out, but a couple that I'd like to mention here in my commentary as well. The nuclear civic, the opposite of testing nukes, indeed choosing to ban them, now provides an additional 10% fame multiplier, so that is a viable option. Also, a lot of the political and artistic ones have changed too. Press freedom now has huge impacts, likewise artistic expression, on stability generation, tying in with some of those earlier changes. Also, political entitlement has changed to buff emblematic unit strength through aristocracy. Political influence now impacts emblematic districts, units, and wonders in how quickly you can build them, and the flow-on civic from that monarchical or monarchy power allows you to get a 20% reduction on buyout costs for either units or districts. A lot of big changes to those late game ones, and also a couple of tweaks in the early game too to things like slaves and other early civics. Overall, civics seem to have been rebalanced to be a lot more powerful in general, in terms of providing impacts on other metrics in the game, right? So those buyout ones let us buy things cheaper. Not a lot of civics previously have messed with the cost of things in game. Some of them have added multipliers or bonuses to certain quarters, like market quarters or farmers, but no changes to that level. Very exciting, actually, changes to the civics tree, making it a lot more interesting and combining well with changes to stability too. And finally, last but not least, it's changes to the game's pacing. It's sort of a two for one. I'm going to break it into two slots. But basically, we've seen some wide-reaching changes to adjust the pacing of the game, essentially making the Neolithic era more difficult and making it harder for you to spam out a whole lot of units and ruin the pacing of the rest of the game. And then some focused changes towards the end as well, to make technologies more expensive, to make stability and district cost scale higher so that you can't infinitely spam out districts, again relating back to those first changes that I mentioned to stability. In terms of specifics, the Neolithic era has basically seen mammoths become stronger, scouts, Harappan runners, scout cavalry not only get new artwork unit like everything else in the game, by the way, loads of new artwork units, so do check out the artworks for different units and different eras because they've all been adjusted. But those guys will receive additional, basically, upkeep costs, up from 0 to 1. And there'll also be some adjustments to ransacking certain things to reduce the amount of food you get from them. Shifting now towards the late game snowball, and we've seen wide-reaching changes to some of the things I've already mentioned. Unit upkeep allowance uses game speed now to scale. Movement to the overall upkeep reduction as well. Armies should be cheaper overall. Technologies more expensive. And some of the more technical quadratic equations around the growth portion of population consumption has changed as well. Overall, we should see the late game take longer. And the TLDR here is that you should be able to spend more quality time in the late game and suffer less from that really crazy snowballing that in particular your opponents, here's looking at you, Humankind AI, may have been able to take advantage of, particularly in the late game, right? The worst thing ever is having the game end because somebody researched all the tech tree. Hopefully we should see adjustments to that, and if not, you can always turn it off now too. Thank you very much for joining me. I will be covering this update, if you're watching this video as soon as it's come out, in a few hours time in a live stream, and I'll have some follow-up videos too, delving into a couple of the more nuanced, interesting, and flavoursome mechanics that have been changed in this update. So do stick around for those, and I'll see you next time.